Hello, PCA community, and welcome back to Mondays with Mike, where I share stories and conversations as well as reflections with our school community to help us grow in wisdom, deepen our partnership together as faculty, staff, and parents, and even the older students, and to see more clearly how God is at work in our children's lives. Today, we're going to dive into a topic that really is pretty deep in our lives. We're going to be talking about the way that we read. And we're going to be talking about books in particular and what types of books we're thinking about reading and what kind of readers that we're raising in this age that I think maybe increasingly forgetting how to read and read in certain ways that have proved beneficial, not just for us, but even our grandparents. So I don't know about you, moms and dads, but AI is a very significant part of my life, but I also want to use it well. But how do I think about recovering or maintaining for myself, but helping our children and grandchildren think about reading? So that's what our theme is today, is about reading in the digital age. And I have a guest with us. She is back. She is a PCA mom. She's also consultant for many, but she thinks deeply. Her name is Susan Arico. And Susan, it is great to have you back. And thanks for helping us think more deeply about reading books.
It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. This is a great topic.
So just to kick us off, I'd really love to hear from you even as we start to talk about this. I could tell you've been thinking really about how books shape us. And it wasn't just books. We were talking about literature. And could you just help us frame the discussion?
Sure. So books, it's always been the case that people have understood that reading is valuable and that what books you are reading matters greatly. Part of being a well-educated, well-rounded, thoughtful human has always included books in some, well, not always, but since the written word in literature was a thing.
Right.
And is that still the case? And why is it so important, even in our modern day? Like those, I think, are the questions that our people are asking, or they're not even thinking to ask them sometimes because reading is, kind of going by the wayside in many cases, sometimes intentionally and sometimes just because life is so full of consuming things.
Sure.
Other than books.
Yeah,
so
it's
for all
coming
of
at
us.
us. Yeah, I've heard it said recently in the last 10 or 15 years that we've moved from the print to basically the visual.
Yeah, more the visual.
And so what are your
right? So I want to make the case strongly, as I have, as I believe and have sort of taught my own kids and engaged in the communities that I think are the sort of best communities, and by which I mean people who are most thoughtfully pursuing flourishing in their lives.
Right.
I want to make the case that books and reading books is vital, and it's as vital today as it has ever been, and it cannot be replaced or substituted by something else. And the reason that that's the case is because engaging with excellent literature is a process of becoming more human, and it is a pursuit of goodness, truth, and beauty.
Okay.
And so there are other ways that we're pursuing goodness, truth, and beauty. Of course, following Christ, being worship, stewarding the earth. I'm not saying it's the only way, but really wrestling through and engaging excellent story and narrative, being part of a hero's journey, seeing people encounter difficult situations, people be tempted by vice, people grow in virtue. It does something in the human heart and allows that human heart to grow in virtue, in imagination, in resilience, in creativity, in ways that other things can't. And so it can't, like if you watch a TV show of a book, it doesn't do any of those things. You're consumed, or maybe it does 1 or 5% of them.
Yeah.
Because the process of letting it get in you and reflecting on it as you're reading, that is what does the work in you. It's not replaceable. It's like watching someone walk on a treadmill.
Right.
Or walking on a treadmill. You can't gain the benefit unless you actually do the walking,
Yes, let's pull that apart. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, I grew up in a family, mostly to my wife, Christy, who loves Jane Austen. She's read some of the books, but in the last 20, 25 years, I mean, Jane Austen's been done and redone at fairly high quality multiple times, right?
Right.
But it's not the same, is it, as reading her books?
Right. Well, and I think it has a lot to do with what I just said about the wrestling and the time and the reflection. I've written I've studied and written a little bit about the difference between consuming, like watching a movie of
Right.
something versus reading it.
Yeah.
And really, it's the activity versus the passivity. When you watch a movie, a lot of the meaning making has been done for you.
Mm-hmm.
What your imagination would do when you were reading has been, somebody else has put the set together and the costumes and picked the actress and done the voices.
Yeah.
So you engage, but nowhere near as deeply as when you're receiving just the words, and your brain has to make all those connections. So the activity of the reading is a lot of what does the work inside.
So let me just ask you this. So I'm going to bring something from my prior profession, but I'm wondering what you think about this. So one of the things we were taught, and some people, this went easier than others in the military, was we call visualization.
Mm-hmm.
So this is taking something that doesn't exist,
Mm-hmm.
either taking just sort of like, and really creating not just an image, but an interactive image, like what, for us, like what is the enemy doing at this time? And then what are we doing? And how they respond. It's very interactive, but it's all in the brain.
Right.
I mean, I've read some literature myself over time.
Right.
I'm a firm advocate, but this idea of the exercise of engaging the brain in a deeply visual process.
Right.
Take us through that.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. That's a good analogy. Because it's deepening your person while you do it, and it's engaging your attention, right? So there's a wrestling. Well, in the visualization case, it's a narrative arc that you're creating in your own mind.
Right.
And similarly, in a book, you're engaging in a narrative arc. And while you're doing that, you're processing the different components that are coming in. This character, are they going to be a good character, a bad character? Was that really the right response? Like, why? What's going to happen later? And so there's a depth that's happening, which that's the forming that's happening in you. Yeah. But really, a lot of the problem that's happening now, and one reason that we're not reading deeply, is because our attention is so fragmented and we're used to much shorter bursts. And in order to read at all, and certainly read deeply, you have to be able to sustain attention in order to be present with the story. Otherwise, you can't track it. And interestingly, in an article that both you and I read called "The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books," that was in The Atlantic, they talked about professors that were seeing kids really their freshmen coming in were really struggling with the books that they were assigned to read. Right. And they said they realized that it was because they had actually not read whole books, even though they were coming into Ivy League schools. Yeah. Because instead they had been, in high school, they had been reading shorter things. It says, the student told Damas that at her public high school, she had never been required to read an entire book. She had been assigned excerpts, poetry, news articles, but not a single book cover to cover. My jaw dropped, the professor said. And they get into, and this is the point. They struggle to attend to small details while keeping track of the overall plot. Yeah. So reading requires you to do these two things at once. Pay attention to detail and then also be able to look at an entire story arc. This is actually not like a side component of being a thoughtful, reflective, well-formed person. This is actually central to being a thoughtful, reflective, well-formed person. And that's why reading good books can't be replaced by something else, because we need to be able to do this work of staying attentive to an entire arc while paying attention to details. And again, letting then that process form us as humans. Right. And without that, the opportunity to engage with goodness, truth, and beauty, it's like you're losing that opportunity. Yeah.
I think back, and I don't know about you, I hadn't thought about this, but I remember I took AP Lit as a senior. Mm-hmm. And there were a positive and negative, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. So first is, I think it was there. It may not have been. Maybe it was English Lit, because I think that was American Lit. Canterbury Tales, Chaucer's works, right? We took segments of those, maybe, and I remember getting a feel for Chaucer, but I didn't get a full appreciation of his entire work. Now, because I don't know if that was beneficial, but I do remember in my senior lit class, we had to read I had to read Robinson Crusoe. So like soup to nuts.
Yeah, of course.
And I remember how, first of all, it's put off by that whole idea. I was like, this is dusty. But I gotta tell you what, to take it all the way through, and I think even the movies, they cut it short. They just sort of talk about him back in the island, not his return. And the formation it was for him as a person. I was like, oh my goodness. Even as in like an 18-year-old, I was like, this is deeper. But I had to read the whole thing.
Totally. Right. And
Yeah.
I mean, and I think to your point, this idea of reading the whole thing, seeing the value in a time before Spark Notes, in a time before book summaries. Again, the book summary may give you the plot. It's not going to do any of the work in you that's going to help form the person that that we want you to become. So, I mean, to your point, reading whole books is the goal. There are times you're going to read, of course, articles. There are times you're going to read poetry. But as parents and as educators, not losing the importance of engaging with these excellent works of literature. Now, most of them will be older because the reason that older literature matters is because it stood the test of time. It's because we know that 100 years later, someone still wants to pick it up, that it still does the work of literature in a human outside. That's why Shakespeare is still relevant, because if you read Romeo and Juliet, it still speaks to someone today. The stuff that's being written today, there's some excellent stuff that's being written today, but that it's too soon to tell.
Yeah.
And so that's number one about stuff that's written today. And number two, a lot of stuff that's written today is being written in order to engage people's short attention spans. It's not trying to go deeper. It's trying to be palatable. And therefore, the richness is not there, kind of by design. So C.S. Lewis...
They're writing, the current writers are often writing to the current audience, which is fragmented.
Right. And if you just think about graphic novels, for example, those are, which I'm not saying there's no place in the world for them, but they're not trying to form goodness, truth, and beauty in the same way. And they're not asking people to deeply reflect. They're not creating a world that someone has to enter into with attention. That's not what they're doing. C.S. Lewis said, and I am grateful to a PCA parent who is much better versed in reading and could do this conversation a lot better than I could. Rebecca DeBase, whose daughter Josie is a rising sophomore. But she reminded me of a quote that said, "It's a good rule after reading a new book, never to allow yourself another new one till you have read an old one in between." And that's by C.S. Lewis, God in the Dock. And he's making the point that old works have timeless truth that help ground us as humans. That we're like, oh, when I read Pride and Prejudice and I see how the little sister who's super flirty and superficial, Kitty and Lydia, how the trouble that they get into and the way that people respond to them and how the deeper people are like rolling their eyes and what their outcomes are like I realize that the clicks in my class that I'm encountering aren't new. Or if I'm looking at Hatchet and I'm seeing how this boy on an island and he doesn't have anything and all these, he works super hard and then it gets taken away and he's got to develop resilience. It gives me some strength when I go out on my soccer team and I'm not being played against. It creates in us, it creates in us self-understanding.
Sure.
And it also allows us to have empathy for other people because we're getting removed from our own immediacy of our own time and we're being put into timeless truth. So I'm not here to say that only traditional literature counts, but I am here to say that I agree with C.S. Lewis. Go one for one. Do an old book and a new book and an old book and a new book and try to make your new book as good quality of a new book as you can do, and for your kids.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was sort of, one of the thoughts I had is sort of, again, to sort of sit side by side to get your thoughts of is Tolkien and Rowling, right?
Yeah.
So Middle Earth and Hogwarts, right?
Right.
I mean, and yet they're clearly different. I've read both.
Yep.
And I think maybe maybe if Lewis would have us go back and forth between.
Well, I think so. Yeah. And I mean, Lewis is, 100 years old. And before that is often considered, well, I think of it as old books, but C.S. Lewis's Narnia was less than 100 years old, right? As to your point about Harry Potter, it's only 20 years old. And, so I do think that looking for living books is what Charlotte Mason calls it, which is these books that have this dimensionality and are really well written and well crafted and that have character formation. Yeah. And she juxtaposes living books to twaddle, and twaddle is her word for book candy, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so sometimes you hear people saying, well, as long as they're reading, it's great. And
I've heard that especially for boys. Oh, I just can't get them.
As long as I can get them reading. That's sort of like saying, here's your dinner plate full of, gummy nerds and Skittles and a Snickers bar. As long as he's eating. Yeah, it's well, to what end? Right? It is true that if you were stranded on a desert island, you'd be happy for a Snickers bar. But the point is to nourish. Mm-hmm. And not all things nourish equally. And that's true for the human soul.
Right.
In books, just like it's true for the human body. Yeah. So I mean, that point of at least I can get them reading, is helpful if it's a very short springboard to something deeper.
Yep.
If you just stay on the springboard, I just disagree with, I think that's problematic, because if you're just consuming all the same stuff you're consuming in our culture of YouTube shorts, is it actually doing anything for you? No, you're just passing time.
Yeah. I don't know about you. It sort of feels like when I do that for too long, I do feel like I've just ate a whole bag of gummy bears, right? Which the first 3 or 4 or 5 bites are really good, but by the time I get to the bottom of the bag, I'm like,
right. Well, honestly, the problem that we know, and this is, I think, a really important point, when you have a lot of sugar, it makes you less interested generally in eating good food. And when you have the habit of eating sugary foods, you're less interested in eating a nutritious meal. And I think a challenge that we have, this goes back to the attention span, is that when we're not in the habit of reading good quality literature, making time, putting priority, having the discipline, when we are in the habit, it makes it easy to do because we get the rewards from it.
Right.
When we're out of the habit of it, it feels like an enormous chore. It feels overwhelming. And you get to this article in The Atlantic with these students who basically are at the point now where it feels impossible and overwhelming and not even worth it to dig into a Chaucer book because they've never done it. And now they're sort of resentful against it almost. We don't want to get to that point. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that's why it's so important to keep our eye from the youngest ages to really help kids fall in love with and feel the expansion that happens with and be eventually trained into, just the way you're trained into athletics. Like the first time you run a mile, you feel terrible, but once you keep on doing it, you feel some accomplishment and you're getting something out of it, right? Same thing with books. Like if we can continue to normalize this, if we can continue to make it happen routinely, start to feel some of those rewards, demonstrate how it's not optional.
Yeah. So I think, let's get to that.
Yeah.
Maybe you can share some of your own stories with your 4 kids, because I don't know about you. Our 4 kids are, some ways they very much come from the same family and very much they're individuals.
Yes.
Ours are responded to reading a little differently.
Yeah.
Each of them did, but it was a high priority for our family.
Yeah.
I know Christy in particular led the way with that, but I'd love to hear, just as you help us think about how do we form that both as parents, and then you're helping us think through it as a school too.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to realize is like kids are going to have different aptitudes to read, all of them, like you already said. So I have 4 kids and some enjoy reading much more than others. And some are much more kind of willing to tackle and bite off a hard book, so to speak, like a non-twaddle book than others. And so just making it a normal part of life and sort of like, this is what we do has always been important. Well, one piece of that has been read alouds, which I'll get to in a minute. And another piece of that has just been like, to a certain degree, like picking books for kids and saying, this is what you're going to read next, or saying, here's 3 books, pick one of them out of these 3 options. Yeah. And then just, like when they were younger, we would just have reading time. We'd be like, get your book, and it has to be the one that you're working on. And I will say it wasn't like every single month. I mean, there would be like in summer, it would happen more, or winter break, or, sometimes during the school year, much less, depending on, we lived in different places. So sometimes they would have time, other times they wouldn't, depending on how rigorous the school was. I did do like book clubs in times when school didn't have a lot of meaty reading. I would just say, hey, we're going to get 2 or 3 other kids and we're going to read these books on the side because we want to make sure we get them in. That's a fun way.
Yeah.
If you can find a couple of other kids who have time and interest.
So
and
make it more social.
Make it a little bit more social. I would lead they would be assigned to read part of a book. We'd get together and talk about it, and, it would be fun. So ish. I mean, I don't know, probably not their favorite childhood memory, but certainly positive.
Sure.
So certainly that would be one. And then another is, so requiring reading and requiring what the books are going to be at a certain level.
Yeah.
Doing it socially at times, and then certainly read aloud. So, from the youngest ages, we've done read alouds, picture books, obviously. And then as they get into elementary school, picking books. I had 4 kids in 5 years, so we could generally do a book that everybody could listen to, although sometimes, people are developmentally at different stages. But, we probably read, I don't know, over the years, 30 or 40 books as read alouds. And some of them I would intersperse. I use the C.S. Lewis rule. We would do an old one, and then we would do a new one that was as close to a living book, right? Okay. So I would go in and I would, like the Penderwicks would be a great example, which is sort of like a similar feel to, say, Little House on the Prairie or Louisa May Alcott, but set today.
Right.
This story of 4 girls, and that's just one example. Another example could be you could do Narnia, and then the next one you could do Harry Potter. Would be like, so you try to, but you do try to make sure that what you're reading out loud is going to, be a meaty read that you're all going to be able to talk about, that you can keep people's attention. And that's the thing about living books, is that you eventually, once you get into them, you are interested. You can't help yourself, kind of. You know what I mean?
Right.
So those would be a few different things.
So I just want to ask, I'm sure, two thoughts around this read aloud, because I think it's powerful in a couple different regards. So I remember the first time that I recall, so I grew up in a family that both my parents read a lot. It wasn't, and they expected us to read. And it wasn't like an expectation, although at one point my dad said, thou shalt read a book, what are you reading? But first of all, I just want to get your thoughts. How important is it for parents, how to say, create an atmosphere or an environment of reading? Because parents may feel like they're in different places on that.
Totally. I mean, I think that when you have kids that are, under 18, it's really important. I mean, there's seasons of your life that you may or may not read as much as parents, but it is a counterbalance that is so desperately needed in our world more than ever before. I mean, the formation of the human person has always been the paramount project, right? Of humanity. I know that I just said humans twice, but the formation of the soul. But today we have such a high volume when you think about the fact that the average kid's on screen 6 or more hours a day, mostly using consumption and consuming short attention span, superficial content. You need to be able to balance that. You need to be able to mitigate that and balance it and create attention, create depth, create reflection, and move them in slow, steady ways toward virtue and away from vice. And that is what reading does. So like in my house, my husband reads, but I was an English major and I'm a literature girl. So I was more I just read all the time. And so having one parent that's, or both, but who are demonstrating reading of literature is really helpful, because then there's a certain amount of sort of osmosis. And then also I just think we are so busy, all of us. I get it. And there's a million priorities. And more than ever, we're driving our kids to travel volleyball, ask me how I know, and travel soccer, ask me how I know. But, audiobooks in the car, you can, with one or several kids, you can do audiobooks and say, this is going to be a sacred time and we're going to get through Huckleberry Finn together. We haven't talked about audiobooks yet, but that's an example of saying, how can I this year make sure that my kids get, 2, 3, 4 real books, either individually or as a family. And so sometimes you can read aloud to 2 kids, but not all 4. I did that for a season because the older ones are gone, but the younger ones are still home. You can do it over meals. We would often, 15 minutes during a meal, we would read a chapter or 2 of a book. So get creative and think, what can work for my family to put this pillar in place in our life? For younger kids, up through, I'd say 5th or 6th grade, having a reading time at night when you're getting ready for bedtime is an easy one that you can just make sure that it's the book that you've okayed as real literature. And then, see that it's happening. Say, oh, did you read? What chapter did you, what happened? Because sometimes kids will, especially in the beginning, they won't want to, they won't tell, you have to but to answer your question, when I read this article about the elite college students who can't read books, it's heartbreaking to me. It's heartbreaking to the professors. It should be heartbreaking for the whole society, because what it demonstrates is we are losing so many of the things that, if we lose engagement with excellent literature, we lose this path to goodness, truth, and beauty. We lose well-formed humans. We lose thoughtfulness, empathy, self-understanding, attention span, having moments of depth, staying with something for longer than 30, 60, 90 seconds. There's so many things we're losing that we can't afford to lose.
Yeah. So the good news, I think, in that is it's so accessible. It's right here. I mean, those classics are available in multiple formats, like you said, right? And I think this idea, I just want to circle back a little bit to the idea of the read aloud.
Yeah.
3 quick data points. First read aloud for me that I remember, although my mom have it, early on I was reading, but the first read aloud was my 5th grade teacher. And he, during lunch, that's when introduced to, Lewis and captivated my attention. One is he had a good reading voice. He'd been doing it a while, and it was during lunch. And boy, we were so excited. And he read others, but that's the one I remember. Fast forward, I know my wife, especially when I was deployed, she used her, and we homeschooled, she used that. And I found that even my oldest daughter, into her teens, so this gets to a question of, how old is too old.
Mm-hmm.
It was really, I don't know if she ever got, because I wasn't there. I don't know if she ever concluded our daughter Sarah in the reading. She may have. I wouldn't be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
But I just know that that's a big part of their story, even now that I missed because I was gone. But but just the idea of that. And then last one is our oldest daughter is just among adults that there was an English guy in her friend group. This is after they graduated from college, and they went to there's a Gordon group that postgraduate, and he would read Harry Potter in his British accents. As one night a week, they would all come over to his house. I didn't meet him, but just the idea of reading aloud, and it isn't just reading, but it formed them individually but collectively.
Totally. And I love that story because I do think that reading aloud is such a communal activity, and it can be not just for little kids, right? So,
right.
I do have friends that still read aloud, and it works, I'll say, for their teenagers. It got to a point where it stopped working with mine, where they just, if the pushback that I was getting and the dynamics that it was creating. But when we went camping last summer, and it was raining and we couldn't go out, and one of my kids picked up a book and started reading it. We were all listening around the campfire, all my teenagers. So I do think that there's something really bonding about it. And think about in your mind the difference between having 3 kids reading a book together around a campfire and 3 kids sitting on phones around a campfire. It's like night and day when you think about the vibe that creates. And that's why we can all intrinsically sort of say, oh, I see why reading's better, but we have to make that priority. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the other, listeners, I don't know where you are in your own experience. So one is, if you're like, I'm not a reader, I would just encourage you that we're all on that journey.
Absolutely.
And we read different things at different seasons. I think, Susan, you made a great point. I think the piece that I'm taking away is, hey, how do I ensure, like right now I'm reading a sort of different genres. Some of it's related to school, some of it's personal. It isn't literature typically, but I think how important to stay in literature.
Yeah. I think that's true. Staying in literature is absolutely true. I think it's especially important for young people. I mean, because like the liberal arts education, which is technically what this type of education is, it's about the word liberal is liberate. That's where it comes from. And it's liberating you from your own vices and appetites and passions.
Yeah.
So that you can be an ordered, measured, well-formed human. And so when you think about literature as a part of the liberal arts education, that is the point of it, right? You're reading about, Robinson Crusoe and battling the elements. You're reading about the hero's journey. You're reading about, I read Anna Karenina last year. Actually, I listened to it on audiobook and like while I was hiking and stuff. And, you've got this person that makes this moral decision to go, she's tempted away from her husband. And in the end, you see that whole story arc and what happens in that relationship very up close and personal and the end that it comes to, right? So you're pondering these things at a deep level and learning from other people's experiences. I mean, that's the beauty of a liberal arts education. And if it becomes so instrumentalized that it's just, and this kind of would go into almost AI, but it's just, can I create an essay and turn it in? Right. Can I, crunch these numbers and turn, it's like, no, we're forming ourselves, we're ordering our loves. Right. And literature has always been and needs to continue to be the primary way to do that. So my original point was that's why young people need it. Yes. Right? These are the years of formation, like 0 to 25, say. Yep. And if you get those years right, if you have protected your attention span, if you've given yourself space to have reflective time in your own mind, if you've tended to other people's stories, if you've wrestled through virtue and vice, then you have the tools to be, quote, liberated by the time you get to adulthood. But if you have not had those opportunities, like these students didn't have those opportunities, the ship sails. Can you remediate it? Yes, but it's a lot harder. Yeah, so they could check, I remember, I think this was Columbia, right, is where they went. So they could check all the performance boxes. Yeah, they got great SAT scores. Right. But the question is what makes them really human. Right. And the ability for themselves. And then ultimately, I mean, I think even of your kids, I mean, how are they going to shape their own communities, their own family, their own church, their own business or workplace environment, which they all will, right? We all do. Right. We're social. Right. God created us as social beings. So, so that's why I would say, like, people have different, once you've come through your education, God willing, you've read a lot of great books, and hopefully you have a lifelong desire, but maybe you're somebody that's like a real numbers person and Sudoku, you do your daily, sure. There's other ways once you've you have that in you, and then your natural propensities, lead you to other directions with how you spend your, literature is still great to have, but it's really in those formative years, it's like, this is the time to really make sure it's happening.
Yeah, I would make the argument. I had he's now with the Lord, but I had a mentor of mine when I was in grad school. He was the head of the math department at Penn State. So obviously real STEM guy, but he would talk about, and he had read deep literature in his very way I could never replicate, but just talk about, first of all, his passion. He called it, he had a sermon because he would preach sometimes, the fire in the numbers, right? So there's that, yes, STEM is not inhuman.
Oh, and so, yeah. And I wasn't trying to say that it was.
No. But I think to your point, I'm sensing even in the sort of broader culture of the community is STEM. And I appreciate John Rowe sharing with me that back to a liberal education, right, is we need both.
100%.
And we need them integrated, right?
Right. And the goodness, truth, and beauty that you find in mathematics is actually profound and speaks of the creator as much as almost anything else. It's like, it's incredible when you look at it that way.
But John's humanity to be able to relate to me and mentor me, probably deeply formed not only by scripture, which it was, but also through these deep readings.
Yeah.
And he's a brilliant mathematician,
right.
Theoretical math that I couldn't even approach.
Right.
But I think back to, what formed John.
Right.
Couple of things I wanted to hit on. I want you to make sure you hit on. You mentioned audiobooks, and then the other one I'd be interested in, especially for adults, is rereading. So the value of rereading, like you mentioned Anna Karenina, I imagine that wasn't your first time.
No.
Yeah. So anyway, audiobooks, rereading.
Yeah. I mean, audiobooks are, you cannot say enough about audiobooks in the modern day, and now there's so many platforms and apps, right? Like Audible, but you can also not have Audible and just do Libby, which gets them out, it's free on Libby as long as you're a library member. So I constantly have books teed up for myself and for my kids on Audible, and do it when you're walking, do it when you're doing chores, do it when you're driving. When I'm done, I will often go to a book club, like an audio, like I'll go to a podcast, and sometimes it's rereading. So right now I'm rereading Brothers Karamazov, which is really long, and I will have to sometimes have someone help me unpack it. But I just reread Pride and Prejudice, which it had been years, so delightful. Jane Eyre, like you said, your wife likes. So when you are reading or listening, it just makes you a better human.
Yeah.
I listen to podcasts as well. They do totally different things. So definitely reread. Pick a book you remember from your childhood or your high school years or your college years, and just think, which of those would I be kind of curious? And listen, reread it and listen to it again. And then I was going to say the name of a podcast that a friend of mine says that she uses the most, which I'm not that familiar with.
Okay.
So I'll give you that. And did I answer your question?
Yeah. So it's the power of the, it's just, well-read books, right?
Close Reads podcast.
Say it again.
Close Reads podcast.
Close Reads podcast.
Yeah. So usually I will just I read Dracula for the first time last year, and Frankenstein, which I had never read either one of them. And I literally just went on my podcast app and said book club Dracula, and then I just listened to 3 of them. That way you got some dimensionality to it,
Yeah, someone else is reading what they're pulling from.
Exactly. And also for adults, while we're talking about that, I highly recommend book clubs. I try to get into them anytime I move to a new place because, we will usually do something like the C.S. Lewis, one old, one new, one old, one new.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting to be, first of all, it's good accountability.
Sure.
It could just be 2, 3, 4 people. It doesn't have to be 10 people.
Right.
And then you get together and you get to chat about what you liked and didn't like, why you couldn't finish it, why you loved it. And it just, again, the dimensionality and the timelessness that comes and the sort of formation and the depth, it's great. So adults, consider that.
Yeah, well, no, it is good. And maybe we can, I don't know if they're local or I imagine I've done an online one.
Yeah, there are online ones I hear. Yeah, I haven't done them before, but I think that's another thing is you can go, I do know one person that is there's some YouTube people that lead them, and then you sort of virtually hey, now get to chapter 4 by next Wednesday, and then I'll come on and lead, and you can leave comments. I mean, way better than nothing, right?
Sure. No, absolutely. Well, I think somebody was explaining this just on scripture, but I think what you just talked about, he said, Scripture is so available to us in so many different formats, in so many different languages, like never before. What a blessing that is. How do we avail ourselves of that opportunity? And you just sort of described the other way. I mean, literature is so available to us, so many ways like never before, and new platforms, new ways. How do we avail ourselves of that? And you're encouraged to do that. Well, good. I want to give you sort of the last couple words of how, final, thoughts. It's been so far a great discussion. I probably will take us one more. Where would you like to take us and land this?
I would just say that in myself, and I think this is true of our kids, what I notice is if I go through a season of several months where I'm only reading nonfiction.
Yeah.
And I'm not reading fiction. I notice when I go back to a fiction book that I feel like a better person. I think sometimes we think that to sit and read a book is selfish as adults, or we think, oh, I don't have time for it, or I can't carve out the attention for it, is really often what we mean.
Yeah.
But it's actually, it's an act of stewardship.
Yeah.
It's an act of deepening our humanity. In that sense, it's almost like an act of worship, because if you understand that literature is a path to goodness, truth, and beauty, you're saying, I'm going to give myself to being human in the best form, and this is a path to doing that, a proven path. So, think of it that way, is what I would encourage adults, and have a perseverance toward it, like you would have toward, say, cleaning up your diet or starting to walk every night after dinner or something like that.
Right.
In fact, do the walk after dinner and listen to an audiobook at the same time. Wow.
Get twofer.
And also just realize how much better your children will be as humans.
Yeah.
It's not it's really, last summer when I was here, we were talking about phones, and I made the plea about goodness, truth, and beauty. Phones is really about whether you're going to be robbed of goodness, truth, and beauty in your life by spending all these hours a day on a phone. And books are a little bit the flip side of that. Give yourself to, create space for, require, once that muscle gets going, it'll pay off. Just, make it enough of a priority that you can get yourself to a place where it gets molded into your own life and the life of your children in this season when they're in your home. It doesn't have to be forever. If it's a real chore for you, okay, then set yourself a timeline of how many years you have left with your kids in the house. But the dividends are so great. And it's not just the dividends of there's so many dimensions in which these dividends pay off, right? We've already talked about some, right? And we haven't even talked about others, but, we've talked about attention. We've talked about soul formation. We've talked about improving relationships. We've talked about growing in virtue. It's just vocabulary is better. Communication's better. Kids who read a lot, they just end up thriving in all these other areas of their life organically.
Yep.
So don't, put it first. I don't mean above God. Put it above lots of other activities, and
our
make
culture is kind of pushing on it right in front of us on our table, right?
And and as parents, I would also just say, this is a great example. My daughter was at camp for 2 weeks. She got home yesterday. She asked to go to the library, and we're going today after soccer practice, right now, right after this.
Yeah.
And I said, "What do you want to read?" And she said, "I don't know. I have to see what's there." And I said, "Well, we need to make sure." I reviewed with her what books she read this past year in school.
Yeah.
I thought mentally about the book she hasn't read as a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, we're also going to be picking 1 or 2 good books, living books, right? And so have you read this? Have you heard of it? Because she's my 4th, so I'm not sure what she's read exactly at this stage.
Right.
And I'm going to, right after this, we're going to go there and we're going to find some of them, and I'm going to let her pick 2 of them. And then I'm going to have to do exactly what I just said, which is get into a groove with her where I say, okay, got to read this one first for this long. And so put some of these things in place, check in with where your kids are at right now in their lives and their reading lives, and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to check in with them. What I heard you say, check in with them. You are still forming them, right? Where even as she's a freshman. She's a woman, but you're forming him. You're in a loving way. You're requiring her to step into this.
100%.
Yeah, I'll close it for dads in particular. I'm going to give you one that, and Susan, I love it. As you and your husband did this with your kids, but I struggle. I really push back, not outside, but inside, because my dad's a pretty strong personality. But I was coming through age 12, 13, and I was required in the summer to read and commit to it and do it. And it caused a real issue for us. And then my dad, I don't know where he got the idea, but he sort of paused. We engaged in a few discussions during the year, and I would just find a book, sitting on my desk in my room, and he would say, you know what? I think you might really like this. You don't have to read it, but I think you would like it. Well, guess what?
It was an invitation.
It was an invitation. Hey, guess what?
You liked them.
Great books.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were history, because that's what I was interested in at the time, but they were good histories. Engaging, thoughtful. They were clearly, I now know they were on all their reading lists at the time. But anyway, I think,
a good point.
I think the way, and I close that thought, because I mean, I appreciate that. My dad and you, I think, were kind of cut from the same bolt of cloth here.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing about that, and I do want to give a couple of reading list sources too before we end. I think I appreciate your point about the dynamic that developed between the two of you, though, as antagonistic, and that's obviously not what we want. We do want to, and your dad did a good job of seeing that and changing course, creating a workaround. I do think we can invite, incentivize, softly require without it being. I mean, phones are a great way. You can say, okay, well, once you've read half an hour of your, like, you know, if there are devices of any kind,
sure,
you know, hey, you know, we do what we must before we want. I got that, by the way, from Pa Ingalls when I did a read aloud with my kids. And I was like, what a great line. We do what we must before we want. You got to do both. So, but I guess I'm just saying, like, we have the opportunity to order things and to incentivize things and to, you know, to have responsibilities and privileges going together. Reading is both a responsibility and a privilege. But while it feels like a responsibility, we can have other privileges that come in to balance it out.
I think that's great.
So, I would just say a few resources. If you're looking for book lists, a couple that I'm aware of that are worth checking out. One would be the Mensa reading lists.
Okay.
So MENSA, you can go on there as a parent and take a look at their stuff. The Well-Trained Mind has a number of reading lists.
Yeah.
Both of those two tend toward the classics, which are very often the places that I'm really wanting to go to make sure that my kids have shored those up.
Yeah.
Another two that are really good are Redeemed Reader book lists. That has more of a balance between kind of what I said, the new book and the old book, both.
Okay.
So that may be a little bit less intimidating if you're coming into it kind of newer. And then there's a really good resource called the Read Aloud Revival, which is excellent for people who are in read aloud seasons with their kids, which could be all the way through high school, but certainly for that sort of like 0 to 13, 14 age, if your kids are kind of in that place. So those would be four: Mensa, Well-Trained Mind, Redeemed Reader, and Read Aloud. I would commend to people.
We'll try to include those links too in the resources. Oh, that's really encouraging. And Susan, thank you so much, both for me, walking with me and thinking about how to walk alongside our community and really help them, because a lot of it sharpens me too. And we're really looking forward to a great year. Moms and dads in particular, I think you're going to be hearing just as a point of emphasis of reading books. And next week, we're going to be talking with Connie Lawrence about AI, and AI is a part of life. How do we bring these two ideas that apparently, at least for me at first blush, are in conflict? We're going to continue to explore them as a school. It's not just AI, but just technology. How do we live in a Susan, you do such a thoughtful approach to it. It is with us, but how do we live thoughtfully? And I think your point is, how do we promote flourishing for our kids and help them navigate this and provide the structures? So thank you so much. I'm going to close in prayer if I could. So Father in heaven, we thank you so much just for this opportunity to think more deeply about you for sure, but also the stories that shape us, stories that have been written, that have proven the test of time. Lord, may they impact us, shape us, our kids, help us as a community to really think deeply about you, but also about you through these classic stories of literature that are so deeply human. And may they continue to help our kids grow and flourish and thriving in this age. In your name we pray together. Amen. Thank you again, Susan.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.